The trade deadline came, the trade deadline went. Why did the New York Football Giants choose to not make any big moves to their roster? Azeez Ojulari, Darius Slayton, maybe Jason Pinnock. A look around the NFL on the day that was as the 4 p.m. deadline passed. Yes, my friends, as we got a little bit of a light situation going on here. So we're going to try to sort ourselves out here as we come to you live. We got a hole in the back of our screen. The sun is beaming in. And it's deadline day for the New York Football Giants, where unfortunately nothing came to pass here for Big Blue, depending on how you look at it. So we're going to go through each and every one of these scenarios here. Azeez Ojulari, the thinking, the high value that they were placing on him ahead of the deadline coming in terms of trade packages. Some other moves that went on, right? What were the things that happened here where the New York Football Giants felt like it was better to keep those players in-house in a 2-7 season versus moving on from them to get some kind of value before this season wraps up? So we'll get into that here coming up in just a couple minutes. Few moments for everyone to get in, get set. Hopefully you've been enjoying yourself on this. What are we talking about? Tuesday afternoon. New York Football Giants did not make any significant moves here, but some other moves did come around the league. So we want to get into all the aspects of it right back in just 1 minute, breaking down the trade deadline for the NFL, talking about some big names that did move and whether or not we agree with the lack of movement from the Giants. All right. So as we continue today's conversation, apologies for having a bit of a chaotic one there. You can still see a little bit of light sneaking in through here. We got a lot going on the day. New York Football Giants don't make any moves. Okay, let's break it down from a player-by-player situation here and whether or not we agree or disagree with it. Andy and I talked about it leading up to this, even over the last few weeks, when game to game, week to week. Oh, is there a glimmer of hope? What are the intentions of this organization? First up, Azeez Ojulari. Now, he's only 2 sacks away from hitting his career high on the year, has 6 right now. And wouldn't you know it, in a walk here, going in towards free agency, he's putting himself in a great position to get a payday. My issue, as it stands right now, per reporting of Dan Duggan, I think Jordan Renan, also Art Stapleton, a lot of guys doing a lot of good coverage of this, is that the New York Football Giants were setting a price point of a 4th-round pick for Azeez Ojulari. Now, remember, he came to the Giants organization via a previous regime, and he also came in on a 2nd-round pick status because he had injury concerns. So the Giants at the time got some value. I remember when they got the pick. I liked him as a player. He fell, and it felt like, okay, because of the injury concern, you are getting a great opportunity to take a look at a player that has talent, that has pedigree, but is going to come with a little bit of risk. And that's essentially how his career has played out here. You go back and you think about his rookie season. We talk about those stats mentioned, tying a career high of 8 if he can get 2 more over the remainder of this season. Big reason why he's able to do that is because Kayvon Thibodeau goes down with the injury, and it obviously puts him in a position, that is Azeez Ojulari, to step in, fill in over the remainder of this season. Although I think we're talking about post-bye week, which will come after the trip to Germany. Kayvon Thibodeau has a good chance to get himself out there on the field again, coming off of his injury. So Azeez Ojulari comes in, as we say, underneath Dave Gettleman. And what have we seen from him over the course of his career? Rookie season, 17 games played, 2021, 49 tackles, 29 solo, 8 sacks, a forced fumble along the way as well, to go along with 2 pass deflections as well. 2022, just 7 games played due to injury, only 14 tackles, 9 solos, still had 5.5 sacks in just those 7 games, right? Big year 2 leap coming. It looks like it was trending in that direction. And yet, because of the injuries, 3 forced fumbles that year, by the way, too. You don't get the full picture. 2023 plays in 11 games, doesn't quite get there in the same way that we had seen him previously, just 2.5 sacks, 16 tackles, 9 solo. So we only get 18 games. Took 2 years basically to get 1 season of games out of Azeez Ojulari. And maybe the biggest factor inside of this after you have a regime change is what happens. You turn around and you have Joe Shane come in and they go ahead and start to reevaluate. This offseason, as we've talked about before, you get what you get and you don't get upset. So when he says to Shane Bowen, defensive coordinator for the New York Giants, listen, we'll go to Carolina and we will get you Brian Burns. We will go and get you this stud player, established pedigree talent, but understand we're not going to be able to add anything else to this defensive unit. Are you comfortable with that? Shane Bowen says yes. To some extent, however you want to think about it, that move does have a one-to-one impact on what you believe of the position. Just like, by the way, when you make the decision on a player like Xavier McKinney in the safety room, well, what is it telling you? It's telling you, one, that you intend maybe to look at the draft to go ahead and select a player there. Ends up being Tyler Nubin. It also means that you look at a player like Jason Pinnock, another pending free agent for the Giants, and say, we like what we've done for him. Maybe, as I think Andy mentioned the other day, maybe it ends up being a $10 to $12 million, average annual salary on a contract with him. Do I want to pay that money? Probably not. Is he going to be worth that much? Certainly, probably not, especially when you see the way Xavier McKinney's been productive. But you also have Dane Belton, another one of your guys. So a big part of this really is reading the previous regime's players and looking at how the Giants have handled that. Now, in the instance of a guy like Andrew Thomas, well, he's a stud left tackle. You're not going to let him walk away. You extend him. Same thing with Dexter Lawrence. But in terms of positions that, the NFL does not value it the same way, you really can hamstring yourself if you pay out big dollar amounts to your safety positions, to your running back positions. We saw the Giants go the other way and say, happy trails, we're going to bring in our players. So you've already drafted Kayvon Thibodeau. He unfortunately has his injury this season. And now you go get Brian Burns. My big part here when we think about the decision around Azeez Ojulari, and we understand the compensatory pick formula and what it means to keep him here and then lose him in free agency, and you can look forward to 2026 and say that in that year, maybe it ends up being X, right? If you were sitting out there right now and a 4th round pick was the expectation, and a lot of teams you're going to be talking to, it's going to be back end of the 4th round. So you do have to, kind of package that in the realm of if a 5th round pick gets offered, are you really saying that's a borderline top of the 6th round, right? Because these are teams that want to go to the playoffs, want to make a run. So I understand looking at this player and saying, is this all we're going to get for him? But the reality is that when you go look at the Giants salary cap right now, and we'll pull that up in the background. I want to see how long we get to run here because, frankly, guys, I'm in a very hot environment right now. And 70, mid 70s in New Jersey on the East Coast for anyone that's here. You guys know the deal. It's getting a little hot up here in the old podcast studio. But when you go over and you look at it, Brian Burns is set right now making a cap hit this year of $15.5 million. But if we go inside his contract a little bit deeper on where he's going to be going forward, well, you're talking about a guy that's going to count for $29, almost $30 million next year. In 2026, it's going to be $30 million, almost $31 million. There's a potential out after 2027, 3 years, $90 million, 14 in dead cap. So then you have him 21.5, in base salary in 2027, $32.5 million, $32.5 million in his age 30 season. Now, as a player and a talent, great. You want to spend the big money on him. But then you remember that you also have Kayvon Thibodeau. And Andy brought up the idea of, do you bring in a player like Brian Burns because maybe there's a world where Kayvon Thibodeau is not going to be someone that you bring back in the long term. Maybe that plays a factor, and his injury plays into how you want to try to navigate the situation with Azeez Ojulari as far as getting to the offseason and the kind of money that you're going to spend on him. But again, if you're going to sit here and be another year away from making 5th-year options decisions about Kayvon Thibodeau and potentially 2 years from now be saying, what's that number look like? Cap's going to go up, whatever, $20 to $30 million a year on an AAV. So you're going to sit there for a 2-year stretch and have $50 million locked into Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns. And then on top of it, you're going to drop what? 8 to 12. Let's just give a wide range here. 8 to 12 million per year on Azeez Ojulari as well to go along with the Dexter Lawrence contract that you already have. And guess what? Spending money or paying talented players is not an issue. It should never be looked at that way. But then all of the sudden, when we're sitting here talking about cap space, right? $256 million of the cap right now, and they have 3.7 available. They're going to get more going forward. Daniel Jones money can come off if they choose to. A lot of different things can happen. That's all great. That's all grand. But I just gave you a sample where 2 years from now, you're spending $100 million across 4 players on your defensive side of the football. That's going to get tricky. And so that's where I have a concern around the New York Football Giants being in this season and getting confused about where are we headed? Where are we headed in the short and long term? I get concerned about the idea that the Giants said, yeah, we're not going to bring back Azeez Ojulari after his contract expires. The previous regime, he has injury concerns. Let's go ahead and think about, we want to get a stud in here on the defensive side of the ball. Let's go get Brian Burns, add him with Dexter Lawrence. Okay, now we're building something. But then you stop yourself short of getting value now and getting value for the next draft, not 2 drafts away when it comes to compensatory picks. That's the part of it that I have a hard time wrapping my head around. Now, if they go ahead and they sign him, hey, then it is what it is. And I can accept the value of saying, we believe in this player. We like what he brings to the core. We like him inside of Shane Bowen's system. And it's different than it felt a year prior when you're sitting there looking at a defensive scheme and a defensive coach, coordinator, and not feeling like all these pieces fit together the right way. That can be it too. And we've seen the production from Azeez Ojulari this year versus last year. That can be a factor inside of this as well. So I don't want to dismiss, relatively speaking, fit versus production versus player and versus value. I don't want to push that to the side here, but I find it interesting. And I was ecstatic when the Giants got him in the draft. I like Azeez Ojulari. I would like him to be here. Even with the injuries, I was advocating for them to maybe take a look at his brother when he was coming out in the draft. But I just see a team that is 2-7 and not making proactive choices to help this roster be better down the line. Now let's flip over to the Darius Slayton of it. This one, I feel the exact opposite about. And we've said this before on the podcast. I have no problem keeping Darius Slayton. You look inside, first of all, and this speaks to the same way we talk about Azeez Ojulari right now. He's had a productive season. Azeez Ojulari's had a productive season. So is Darius Slayton. When you look inside, and then we'll, of course, do the both and, right? We'll also criticize the organization here a little bit. So Darius Slayton, you tried to negotiate for more money. They gave him a little bit of a bump. For a player that was taken by the previous regime, who's 27 years old, he won't be 28 until January, and who has come in as a 5th-round selection and been very productive overall. He already has 470 yards, 9 games through this season. That math probably comes close to him having a career year in terms of yardage. He has 32 receptions right now. His career high is 50. He did that in 2020, and he also did it last season in 17 games. This makes all the sense in the world because of another potential mistake that you made. Jalen Hyatt, first-round pedigree, first-round talent, starts to drop in the draft. Giants move up to get him in the 3rd round, and we think, hey, this guy, you believe he has all the skill sets, and you just got to coach him up, and once he gets there, boom, you're going to see a playmaker on the field. Boom. He cannot get onto the field. Now, part of that can be because Darius Slayton has been productive, and he's held him off. And we said this last year. I thought that Darius Slayton had one of the best years of his career, and I think that he's putting together another one of those type seasons after a slow start. And even in this muddled year when the Giants aren't winning games and the offense still feels clunky, you're still seeing him be very productive, and there's a correlation between that and also having a number 1 wide receiver in Malik Nabers. On top of which, though, I will remind everybody that Darius Slayton stepped up when Malik Nabers went down with a concussion. So that's when you took the number 1 wide receiver off the field, and Darius Slayton showed, hey, I can step up and I can get the job done for you. He has 25 first downs on the year. His career high in that category is 40. So I want to do a little bit of back of the napkin math here as we walk through, just in terms of where his career numbers are going to end up here, right? Because you're talking about a guy, again, so 32 receptions through those 9 games. He's sitting here getting 3.5 catches, right? Go ahead and put that over the 17-game season. And even though obviously it's going to look potentially a little bit different, it's going to be 60 catches. So you're going to be 10 catches over his career high right now. That's fantastic for him. 469 yards. You're going to go ahead and drop that in over the 9 games so far. And then you're going to go ahead and say, what can we think about over the 17-game season? 885. Again, another career high. That would be over 100 yards more than he's ever put up in a single season. And same thing when it comes to that's 9, 18, 27. He's basically averaging 3 first downs a year. You're talking about 37. You're talking about 51 first downs on the season. And that obviously has to do with the other players on the field and how the offense is getting called. But 51 first downs will be another career high. Only has 1 touchdown. Has never come close to. Last year had 4 touchdown catches. Rookie season 8. Right? So the production hasn't gotten there. He has 20 career touchdown catches for the New York Football Giants. I'm fine to keep him because nobody else has shown themselves deserving of that bigger role. We'll get into some comments here because I see someone popped up in the chat. Thank you for being a part of it. Excuse me for just here in a faded T-shirt. It's warm currently in the studio, so trying to battle through it. But when I think about a player like this, when we think about Darius Slayton, like this is what I'm talking about. All time. I love to do this, by the way. When you look inside where the Giants currently stand in receiving yards, Darius Slayton is already like climbing up to a not insignificant category. So let's look inside wide receivers, right? And it'll take a minute here to get these numbers up for me. And I think about this, Amani Toomer, all-time great. And Darius Slayton's career is never going to amount to that. And I want to make that very clear. But there's something to be said for when you start to total up his numbers, and we see that Darius Slayton is 18th right now in total yards for his career. Touchdowns, and you're going to get some running backs mixed in here as well for sure. But his 20 touchdowns already puts him 23rd. And it only takes, 5 more touchdowns for him, and he's going to be in the top 20. He's going to be 16th on this list. If he finished his career for the Giants with 30 career touchdowns, that'd be good for 12th all time. No, excuse me. That'd be top 10 all time. He'd be 10th all time in touchdown receptions. There's something to that. If he keeps averaging 800 yards, 700, 800 yard seasons, and you sign him to an extension this offseason because he's a good, productive player, and he can slide down your depth chart as you get better receivers and more complementary, as this offense expands and you get a better quarterback, all good. As you start to do that, you're going to look back and be talking about a top 15 receiver in Giants history. And that's because he offers you consistency, season over season. We know the catch and the drop percentage and all those things. He's gotten better and better with that year over year. It's taken a while to get there. So I'm fine to keep him because Wan'Dale Robinson, as we talked about coming out of the Commanders game, we like him. We want him to continue to grow and expand his game, but it hasn't quite gotten there so far. Isaiah Hodgins 2 years ago, oh my goodness, watch out. That is why Darius Slayton doesn't matter. He's not on the field. He's on the practice squad, right? So keeping him, I'm fine with. Checking out over to the chat. Since so many of Shane's picks had great potential, do you see it as a coaching and development lapse, or was talent misevaluated from the front office? This is a good part of it too. Because we're talking about 2 previous regimes, right? We're talking about 2 players from previous regimes and what the Giants are choosing to do in it. Now, recently it came out and PFF graded the Giants draft class as one of the best graded drafts, rookie draft classes of the year. And you saw a guy like Theo Johnson. He makes that good catch. He's had some of those drops mixed in. We've seen Tyrone Tracy Jr. and what that's meant. I think in Bobby Johnson, we talked about that in the postgame takeaways from the Commanders. Well, you see Bobby Johnson, he seems to be doing good work when you look over at The Commanders' offensive line has a lot to do with Jaden Daniels and just, being a good team and having weapons and a scheme and all that stuff. But, well, that head coach didn't have a problem. So that makes you think talent, right? Players just aren't good enough to be successful. And the Giants go out and get multiple new offensive linemen. And then you see Bobby Johnson working with a different unit, and suddenly it feels like it works a little better. The problem we have right now, to talk about like Jalen Hyatt, right? And what that means, because he hasn't gotten on the field, 3rd round pick, can't seem to find it in year 2. That's a concern, without a doubt. This year's draft class seems more successful. Deonte Banks, I don't know. You want to say that's coaching? Hard to say. We got to also get to the Nick McCloud of all this, because that's the one thing the Giants did do at the deadline, is release a player. We actually got to get into this because it's a real problem for me. Is release a player that started 5 games for you, who's filled in over the last couple of years, been a solid player. I'm not telling you, like I said, it was a, $3 million deal, restricted free agent, pending restricted free agent Nick McCloud. And the Giants ended up releasing him because they went to him like they did with Darius Slayton and said, you got to take a pay cut, to the tune of saving $1 million, because the assumption is they're going to bring up Stroman from the practice squad and he'll replace him for the Giants the remainder of the season. And so you're going to end up coming out in the wash about $1 million in cap savings. Now, again, I'm not telling you that Nick McCloud is the key cog in the Giants machine going forward in the secondary. But you got veteran Adoree Jackson, who you brought back late in the offseason. He's been fine. You got Cordell Flott. He's trying to develop. You're playing him on the outside, etc. You got guys like Trey Hawkins that we've seen him flash once upon a time, then couldn't get it going. Late round draft pick. He gets hurt. Got Deonte Banks struggling all over the field. And the reason why I have a problem with it is, one, because you got rid of a guy for $1 million. What else is going on this season? I mean, if something else happens, fantastic. But as of right now, nothing is happening. So, this isn't, well, we're going to make this move at the deadline, and because of that, we need to make sure we need every single dollar that we can possibly get. Instead, and this was getting said by everybody around the league, around the media, excuse me, Art Stapleton, Jordan Renan, they were saying, like, this feels like a cutthroat type of move to go to a player and say, hey, you got to take a pay cut right now off your $3 million contract or you're done. And there'll be other guys. You'll sign a veteran in the offseason. You'll draft a player in the mid rounds. I get all that. But they said that he's a well-respected and regarded player in the locker room. So why? Like, why make that decision on that player for a unit that has struggled mightily all year long in a season when you're 2-7, and you get kind of free wins here from a PR standpoint? We respect and appreciate everything that Nick McCloud has done for us. Had a little injury this year, came back, key special teamer, steps up and plays and starts for us because we have so many guys in and out of the lineup. Drew Phillips, the rookie, plays in and out, had an injury, comes back, right? Struggling, learning curve a little bit, middle of the season here. And you jettison a guy that's been nothing but a pro for you. That's weird to me. And it's weird to me in a way that Andy was talking about yesterday. How do we assess what the Giants are, where Brian Dable and where Joe Shane stand, and the evaluation process? And we'll talk about this more tomorrow because I think Andy deserves, potentially, we'll see, could deserve a pat on the back for the idea of, well, if you jettison these guys like Darius Slayton or Azeez Ojulari or Jason Pinnock, you're saying, listen, the record doesn't matter. We want to make sure we're bad enough. We want to be near top of the draft, and your jobs are safe because we can't strip the roster and then also tell you if it's good or bad. I push back on the idea, well, if you're not safe, who cares? Strip the roster, get all the assets we can because you're not going to be making those decisions a year from now. In theory, that speaks to the idea of job security. Don't worry about it, right? If you strip it away. Keeping them, as Andy suggested, means we're still evaluating. John Mara gave the vote of confidence. We're going to see this plan through. We're not going to make changes. We believe in the coach. We believe in the GM. All good. Nothing to worry about. All good. Okay. The Nick McCloud piece makes it feel like you're trying to take away just enough. Then you get rid of just enough so that you can guarantee some losses. But keeping Azeez Ojulari, keeping Darius Slayton, keeping Jason Pinnock, this speaks to maybe saying you're still going to have pieces to work with here. We're not going to remove Azeez Ojulari when we're still at least a game, maybe 2 games away from getting back Thibodeau. We're not going to get rid of Jason Pinnock when we have a rookie Tyler Nubin and, multifunctional, but has never really quite gotten there, Dane Belton on the back end. We're not going to leave you with nothing back there because we want you to prove that you're a good football coach, that you're a good football team, and that some of your picks and some of your decisions have been worth it. I don't know if that correlates to wins and losses or not, but we'll get into that a bit more tomorrow with Andy. What does it mean now for the rest of this season? What do the goals need to be? What do the Giants need to do? What does Brian Daboll need to do? And what will we think about Joe Schoen and his process? I have another one here, man. Get in the comment. I'm very curious if people are interested in this in season because I know there's still games to play. You can still evaluate talent. You can still evaluate guys on the roster. But I'm very interested to go back to this offseason, set the table where the cap was, set the decisions that they need to make, knowing what we know now. We get the benefit of being into the crystal ball and seeing the results and being 2-7. But how would you have done it differently? And we talked about this at the time. We talked about it even with the Brian Burns trade. Not that we didn't love Brian Burns, the player, the talent. But he was on a team that couldn't win any football games because the defense wasn't talented enough in totality. And now he's on a football team where the defense isn't good enough and the totality of the talent is not good enough to win football games. What could this have looked like right now? Take record off the table even. Just what could this have looked like right now at the deadline of this season? I want to do that. I'd like to do that in season. If people are into that, I'd love to do an in season, do a live just like this. We hash it out together, talk about free agents, talk about where other teams, where the contracts came in for these guys, right? Let's go and reallocate. And let's make ourselves the team that went over the top to get player X to secure player Y. Yeah, we spent more. Any contract out there, we spent more than anybody else was willing to because we wanted these particular players. What does that look like for us? Every version of it, keeping Xavier McKinney, keeping Saquon Barkley, but then moving that away and saying, yeah, those guys are still walking out the door. How would we have constructed this roster? What would the fan base have wanted to do? So I'd like to do that somewhere along the way here. And guess what? 2-7. Got a bye week coming up after the Germany game against the Panthers. We're going to have time for that. Ron Lewis Rogers, RLR, as you're commonly known to by your friends and family. I'm starting the video late, but the Giants probably want too much compensation. They better extend Ojulari, Slayton, and Pinnock. Otherwise, they walk for nothing. Yeah. So and just to recap, as a good reminder, RLR, that back at the top, Giants don't make any moves with the key players that we've talked about, Slayton, Azeez, even Pinnock to a certain extent as well. And yes, they did want too much. When it comes to a player like Azeez specifically, it was a 4th-round pick they were looking for, and nobody was willing to offer that. That's it. Now, to your point about extending, which I think is the last piece of this, that's the interesting part to me here as well. Because if we're talking about where are we going to be at the end of this season, that gets interesting. Because we know that the Giants can take the dead cap hit on Daniel Jones' contract and move off of him. The conversation about, well, the Giants are definitely going to take a quarterback, that's a conversation for another day. I don't know if that's coming down the pike immediately or if you might be another year away. Darius Slayton, as it currently stands, has a total cap hit of $7.95 million, right? What will an extension for a 27, 28-year-old look like? Even if we keep it in the same kind of realm, let's call it 10 million, right? And he's going to be 28 years old. Let's be generous for the sake of being generous. Rather than 2-year deal, let's call it a 3-year. Let's call it a 3-year, $32 million, and it's really a 2-year deal. You can cut ties if you want to, right? So that's Darius Slayton. Now, Azeez, that's hard. And I do want to get into some of the other moves that were made around the league here. Azeez is an interesting one. Take a look over at free agents. And we'll see if we can get some projections here about where their market value is in next off season, right? So we fast forward to 2025. And we're just looking for anybody that lives in the edge rusher, outside linebacker kind of spot, right? Can't talk about Khalil Mack or Hassan Reddick. There's a lot of guys out there, a lot of guys out there not to be so intrigued by. Josh Sweat, Chase Young. I mean, you got some big names out there, right? But I'm trying to find a guy that kind of lives in that type of territory, right? And there's a market value on a player. He's going to be way too old. You got to try to find a market value on a guy that's at least something in there. Chase Young is such a difficult one to even have the discussion on at this point. Because he's, and by the way, not on the team that he started with, is he? Right? Not on the team that he started with. Chase Young started with Washington for the first 3 years of his career. He had 8 sacks. That's a career high. That's like what Azeez Ojulari did in his rookie season. He had a shortened through injury to only 2 sacks over the next 2 seasons. Goes to San Francisco, gets 8 sacks. Now plays in New Orleans in 2024, just 2 sacks on the year. His market value, as per Spot Track, comes in at $9.7 million. Average AAV. There you go. Now, it's interesting. They list it as like 1 year, as a 1 year, $10 million contract, right? So even if Azeez, like you talk about extending him, let's just call it a 2. Let's just call it a 2 for 20, right? 2 for 20 million. So now I'm sitting there and I've got now $20 million occupied between those 2 players going into next season. And again, I'll remind you from the top. I said that I like Darius Slayton. I think they should want him here. I think that veteran, consistent wide receivers are hard to find. And you look back over these last handful of years, Darius Slayton is one of the constants in that wide receiver room, and he's gotten better for himself. Take a quick pop over here. DeAndre Huffman, I would rather keep Ojulari for a season instead of a 5th or 6th. Now, again, you're only keeping him for a half season because we're 9 games in here, right? We got 8 left to go. Giants are 2-7. And I'm not knocking you. It's fine. You want to keep him for the next. You want 8 games of Azeez Ojulari rather than a 5th round pick, right? Now, if the Giants really wanted that 4th round pick, and I'll ask that to you, DeAndre, because I ask it to myself. If I'm the New York Football Giants and I want that 4th round pick, guys, give me a sneeze coming on. Everyone, watch out. I feel like I'm in the war room right now on draft night. I'm hot, sweaty. I got coffee here, but it's hot coffee. Why am I drinking that? All right. You want to keep him, though. Now, if I was the Giants and I wanted that 4th round pick, I'm having real conversations about saying, what is it? For Azeez, I'll give you Azeez and the 7th to get that 4th round pick. Is it Azeez and a 6? Well, we're a bad team. So my 6 is a borderline 5th, right? Because we're going to be near the bottom of this thing. But I have those conversations, and I hope that Joe Schoen was having them. Not just saying, we want 4th round pick. Anything else? No. 4th round pick or nothing. Can we maybe combine? No. 4th round pick or nothing. And sometimes you set a bar high enough that teams aren't going to reach it. And you're allowed to say to the media, listen, we looked at the market. We were taking phone calls, always open, but nothing came to fruition. And that's why we're going to move forward. And we're hoping that we can keep Azeez a part of this team going forward. Maybe that's the case. For a 5th round pick, 6th round pick, I get the debate, DeAndre. I probably am in those kind of waters where I think, listen, Thibodeau's injured. You can't just strip the team down to studs. A conversation for another day about how you do rebuilds. But if you told me they could have gotten to that 4th round value through something, a little bit of a different conversation. But I'm fine. You want to keep him, okay? But again, are you ready? Are you ready to give him $10 million a year? Because somebody on the market at a minimum is gonna go 1 for 10. Because another team will say worth the risk. And unlike, see, I think this happens sometimes too. The Giants drafted him, previous regime, but the Giants drafted him. So when you come to the negotiation table and you hit free agency, the homegrown team, you want them to show you that they want you. You want the multiple years. I was thinking about this, and I want to pull this up actually. And now I'm gonna forget the name again. He was on the roster, and then he went to the Atlanta Falcons. Lorenzo Carter, and this player is not on the level of a Azeez Ojulari, at least from a pedigree standpoint, right? But Lorenzo Carter, he walked away. Giants, we knew it. We knew it as the season went. This guy's not going to be a part of it. He's going to move on. See you later. Good luck. You're never good enough anyway. You say that, but for a third round pick, and by the way, I'm talking about third round pick for him. It's second round pick for Azeez, so I shouldn't really, go too negative on the pedigree. This guy turned around. So let's take a look at the contract, right? He signed a deal. He signed a 2-year, $9 million contract extension. Pending free agent, excuse me. He signed a 2-year deal there. 4.25 cap hit, 4.75 cap hit, right? Depth player. 28 years old now, going to be 29 years old. Been in the league 6 years. Played the first 4 with the Giants. First season with Atlanta, 17 games, started every single one of them. Gave you 4 sacks, 58 tackles, 29 solo, 29 assisted, interception. Now, immediately, the very next year, he played 81% of the snaps. The following season, and so now he's into his 3rd year now. So that was a 1-year deal he initially signed, as I remember. And then he turned around and signed the 2-year extension. He only played 37% of the snaps in 2023. 17 games, just 1 start. Gave you 3 sacks, 35 tackles, 24 solo, 11 assisted, 1 forced fumble in there. Solid player, though. Solid player. The difference being that it didn't take $10 million. The $10 million got you 2 years of him. And actually got you, I can't remember what the first year contract was. In 2022, $3.5 million, it looks like. And then 5.3 in 2023, 3.75 this year. He's earned $18 million career. If you could have told me that, if you told anybody, any team, for $18 million, 6 years of an NFL player, NFL linebacker, outside edge rusher, and you're going to walk away with a player that in 2024 doesn't have any sacks on the season, just to be clear, he's only playing 50% of the snap counts. I get it. And he started 5 games this season for Atlanta. And by the way, Atlanta's a team that maybe was in the market for a player like Azeez Ojulari. Now, I'm not knocking it. He's better at his depth. I'm not talking about putting Lorenzo Carter as your stud starter. It's the same thing with Azeez. Why do you go get Brian Burns? I don't think Azeez is a stud starter. Okay. 6-year career, 9, 10, 15, 19, 22 career sacks. Maybe he gets a couple this season. Maybe he doesn't. 20 to 25 sacks. Solid depth player. Playing 50 to 60% of your snaps. Yeah. So value. Getting value. And when you think you have value, like Lorenzo Carter, not pinching the person. This is the previous regime. I get that. But not or is it the previous regime? Let me do a double check there. No, 2021. Yeah. So this is year 3. So one of the first decisions that they made. I don't know. Maybe I'd be just as happy to have had Lorenzo Carter for the last few seasons on the roster as a depth player with those type of expectations. Not Boogie Basham, who's not on this team anymore. It's just, it's hard to wrap your head around it. And it's hard to come out of a deadline for the Giants and answer the question that was asked here somewhere earlier in the chat. It's like, where does it stand now? And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. It's hard. It's hard to look at it. And by the way, some other things that happened here, because I want to make sure that we cover this as well. Other trades that happened around the league, just in terms of where guys ended up going, right? Tre'Davious White was traded from the Rams to the Ravens. They made some, Rams made some, hey, okay, get a couple things off the roster here, willing to sacrifice a little bit. 2027 7th round pick and White to the Ravens for a 2026 7th round pick. Note, not talking about 2025 draft capital. We're talking about 2026. So he could have made that decision too. I want that 4th round pick for Azeez. Will I take a 4th round pick in 2026 if I can't get in 2025? Yeah, probably. Right? At least worth having that conversation. Preston Smith went to the Steelers from the Packers. Didn't have compensation on that one. Mike Williams, he also goes to the Steelers. Jets are trying to get themselves better. Good move, by the way, for the Jets. They make that move and they get themselves a 2025 5th round pick. So, I to me, you probably have the conversation that's what you're talking about. If you're pro moving on from Darius Slayton, then there's probably a 5th rounder that was out there to be had if you wanted to. Again, I'm pro keeping Darius Slayton, but that'd be the conversation you could have. Marshawn Lattimore, he goes to the Commanders. So the team that lost a ton of games last year and was high enough in the draft class, took their quarterback. They try to improve their defense here. Saints will get a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick, and a 6th round pick. But Washington will get Lattimore and a 5th round pick. Here's one. Another division team. Jonathan Mingo. If you're a fan of the podcast and you're a fan of my draft coverage, I really like Jonathan Mingo, Ole Miss product, coming out. And guess what? You're not going to sit here and say, "Oh my God, Adam, you were so right," because the stats haven't been there. Now, me personally, I take a look at a player that gets drafted to the Carolina Panthers, and I say, don't judge him by what happened there. He goes to the Dallas Cowboys, and I was curious about what it ended up being. Jonathan Mingo and a 2025 7th round pick in exchange for a 4th round pick. There you go. We talked about before. What does it take to sweeten a pot to get from a 5th to a 4, right? Not a bad conversation to have. Try to remember. Trying to remember where Jonathan Mingo ended up getting drafted. Let's take a peek. Jonathan Mingo went 2nd round, pick 39 in 2023. So you're talking about value. You have to throw in a little something to get there. But he drops 3 rounds in value because it just flat out was not there for him, right? 6'2", 220. He's 23 years old. Rookie year, 43 catches on 85 targets, 418 yards, only 9.7 average. Like, we get that, right? I'll use PFF here just out of curiosity. 9 games this season, 12 catches, 26 targets, 121 yards. And not a lot going on there. Dallas going to be without Dak Prescott now for a while. I don't know what to make out of what his value is going to look like. I liked him as a player. I'm only doing this because I liked him as a player. That's why we're spending the extra minute here going to PFF, talking about how did this guy grade out. I'll be honest with you guys. I have no idea what I'm looking at right now. There we are. Overall grade, 46.8. Not great. 90th out of 91 wide receivers. That's concerning. Receiving grade, 49.7. That's 89th out of 91. And again, 27 targets, 12 catches, 121 yards. It's not a good look for me. It makes me look bad. One thing I will say is this is what I'll read off to you on him. And this is like the kind of thing that on a high level for the Giants, that doesn't happen a lot in the NFL. So don't get, I get that. But one of the things I wouldn't have hated the Giants doing is trying to shuffle some product here a little bit. Get a little bit younger, right? And give yourself 8 games to evaluate. Now you got your own players to evaluate. You know, all the young guys. Deonte Banks got to show some stuff. Tyler Newman, Drew Phillips, Cordell Fly. We got plenty of young players to continue the evaluation process on. But when I look at, I'm using Mingo as the example. Jonathan Mingo came out, 6.27 prospect, wide receiver, will eventually be average starter. So you're talking about starters. Okay, starter grade at least. He goes 8th overall in the 2nd round. His production scores is 68, athleticism 78, overall 76. Ran a 4.46, not speedy. 39.5 vertical, 10.9 broad jump. Had some good things. It was the strength, the size. Now you can make the case they have a Leggett there as well, or Leggett in Carolina. You can make the case they fell in love with like physical kind of receivers, trying to get themselves a DK Metcalf kind of guy. And maybe that's to their own failing. But easy to recognize spends time on his craft, adequate footwork, finds the top speed quickly. Routes are run with attention to detail. So, my point being is let's compare him to, say, Jalen Hyatt. Hey, guy runs good routes, physical, strong. Okay. I'm not telling you to trade a 4th-round pick for Jonathan Mingo to get him in the door here. By and large, everyone suggests the Dallas overpaid to get him from Carolina. But just look around the league and say, hey, can we go grab a guy here and give ourselves an opportunity to get a look? Herbert went from the Bengals to the Bengals from the Bears. Not something the Giants are going to touch there. Smith went to the Lions from the Browns, right? So some teams like just shuffled some pieces around here. Baron Browning went from the Broncos to the Cardinals. Teams that are competing and playing good games, but also making decisions. That resulted in a 6th-round pick. Like this back-end fodder, Guys that maybe just fit better inside of your scheme than they did somewhere else. Panthers also traded Deontay Johnson along the way here too. So they cleared out a lot of their wide receiver room over the course of these last couple of games. And they got nothing to compete for, but that's the same kind of team, right? Giants are in the same boat. So you see Carolina, not that I'm calling them a well-run organization, but you see them making those moves. You say, okay, did we do enough here? Did we answer enough calls? Did we make enough calls? I don't know. Let's get back into it here. Even with stockpiling, even with a stockpile of premium picks, are you confident that this staff can make the right decision? Not necessarily. TBD, right? Some draft classes look good. Rookie classes sometimes look better. And then in years 2 and 3, they start to look a little bit shakier. Let me see what your second part was here. I'm going to go take a look at it. Their track record of constant misses says no, absolutely not. And okay, so here's the other part of it too, right? Because we'll go through it now. This is good. By the way, what are the Giants going to do going forward? What do the next 8 games look like, right? How do you evaluate? All that stuff we talk about tomorrow. And then we'll start to set the table for Sunday morning in Germany, taking on the Carolina Panthers. So we're going to do all those things. But you talk about the draft history, right? So we now got 3 draft classes in the door here. Let's back it all the way up to that first year, right? Now, from the bottom up, from latest pick to highest pick, we understand expectations rise as you get higher, and the back end ones shouldn't matter as much. Although Darian Beavers, who didn't work out, I should say, his teammate from Cincinnati, I'm going to forget where he is, but he went in the same draft class, and he made the wrong choice, and the better Cincinnati player went to another team and is playing better. Okay, Darian Beavers, miss. Marcus McCathan, miss. DJ Davidson, miss. Micah McFadden, 5th-round pick, that's a hit. Dane Belton, somewhere in the middle. Daniel Bellinger, hit early, maybe not so much a hit anymore. Cordell Flott, jury's still out, but probably something muddling, closer to a miss than a hit. Joshua Zudu, miss. Wan'Dale Robinson, okay, need that next step. We're not going to kill him just yet. Injury first season, but it's getting late early, as Yogi Berra would say. Evan Neal, absolute miss. Kayvon Thibodeau, let's call him a hit. Doesn't mean he's lived up to the 5th overall pick status, but let's call him a hit for that sake. So you're really talking about in the first draft, when you're turning over the regime and you got to set the baseline. You had all of these picks, including 3 5th-rounders, 2 4th-rounders, 2 3rd-rounders, and 2 in the first round, right? And I can point out right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clear misses throughout it, and we understand the value. 5 clear misses in there. I get 1, 2. I'll put 2 into hit categories in McFadden and in Thibodeau. And then Robinson, Cordell Flott, Bellinger, Belton, I'm going to give them maybe. And again, trending the wrong way probably, but I'll give them a maybe. There's something muddled there, right? You only get 2 hits out of that draft class. Fast forward. Late round picks, we understand. We all get this status. Javarius Owens, haven't seen him. They brought in a lot of guys this offseason, so it doesn't look like he's developing the way they hoped. Jordan Riley, miss. Trey Hawkins, miss. Eric Gray, miss. You went out and got 2 more running backs this offseason in the draft. Even if he's played more, it doesn't matter. And Tyron Tracy Jr. is the next running back for the Giants, right? We get that. Jalen Hyatt, I'll say jury out, but trending very much towards miss. John Michael Schmitz playing, starting. Got to keep working. We'll call him a hit. Deonte Banks right now, you'd say miss. So I just went through that, and let's just call him the maybe, though, because he had a good rookie season, bad second season. Or promising rookie season, having a bad second season. So hit on Schmidt. Hit on Schmidt. John Michael Schmidt. If we call him a hit, that's one. Everybody from the 5th round down are misses, and Banks and Hyatt right now are big question marks as they currently stand. So 2 hits in their first draft, 1 hit in their second draft, and we're living on like 6 maybes. Current draft class, rookie class. Muasau has played a bunch, so I'm going to give him credit. And again, 6th round pick. Hit doesn't really matter here, but Tyrone J.C. Jr. hit. Theo Johnson, I think, trending towards hit. Needs some time. We get that. Didn't play a lot. Phillips, we can call a hit. I think it's going the right way. Tyler Nubin, Malik Neighbors. These guys feel like hits, but the big caveat is players that felt like hits, even Jalen Hyatt, by the way. Jalen Hyatt coming out of the rookie year, we were like, okay, well, let's get it going here, right? Had some work to do. He played in 17 games, 7 starts, 40 targets, 23 catches, 373, right? You're like, hey, let's go. Good. Still got to work on the route tree. Got to refine his game a little bit. 8 games, 2 starts, 8 targets, 1 catch. So that's the delicate balance here from year 1 to year 2. And that's a problem. It's a problem for this organization. If we go back and we keep tallying up, especially towards the top, more misses than hits, more question marks than locks, we got a problem. And I would never sit here and tell you that Dave Gettleman was a good GM. I would not do that. But what I will tell you is the one thing that you can say in terms of cornerstone kind of moves that you needed to make, right? And by the way, speaking of misses, Kadarius Toney. That was a miss for Dave Gettleman, right? Aaron Robinson, that was a miss. Ellerson Smith, that was a miss. Gary Brightwell, I'm actually going to give that a bit of a hit. Just because 20, 6th round pick. Nobody cares. But Rodarius Williams, it's also a miss. But remember, he also gave you Andrew Thomas. He gave you Xavier McKinney. McKinney, clearly a stud. Didn't want to pay him. That's okay. Tons of misses in 2020. Carter Coughlin, good special teams player for a while. Tate Crowder flashed for a bit. Darnay Holmes hung on for a while with a role. Even Shane Lemieux as well, right? Played 19 games for the team. And then you get back to that other one, the Daniel Jones one, right? That's Dexter Lawrence. DeAndre Banker is a miss. Zimenez, 3rd round pick. You call that a miss because you need more than that. You probably want him to get the 2nd contract. Julian Love, that's a hit. By the way, the Giants let him walk. He goes to Seattle. What version of this team will we be talking about potentially in that regard, too? That's another fun conversation. Let's write that down. Let's get Julian Love down on paper. Because he's not Xavier McKinney, but he's also a really solid safety. Ryan Connolly, Darius Slayton, couldn't call him a hit. Corey Ballantyne, nobody. Nothing really there, right? Will Hernandez performed pretty well. Let me get to that Lorenzo Carter draft, too. But you see it. Like, you can see it written in the wall here, written on the walls here, right? The labor of where's the quality? Even the hit in Saquon Barkley in 2018, you still go, yeah, but it wasn't the right allocation. So, point being is you can go all the way back to 2018 and have this conversation about how every single year the Giants miss more than they hit. The Giants make mistakes more than they make successes, right? Wrong moves, not right moves. So now at this deadline, you say, should we have traded Azeez Ojulari? Should we have traded Darius Slayton, Jason Pinnock? Should we have done things differently in the offseason? Are we prepared to go into next offseason, make the right moves, have the right people in place, and then boom, drop a quarterback in if we choose to? Couldn't tell you. And there's nobody that could have any level of elite confidence that Joe Schoen is the right GM and that even Brian Daboll is the right head coach. The difference is among Gettleman's misses, there are 2. Yeah, of course, 100%. No, 100%. The real thing about it when it comes to Gettleman, it's actually the other stuff too. Now, can you know that Nate Solder is going to be a disaster? Probably not. It's best tackle on there. You need to protect him, all that good stuff. A lot of it's the management of that, right? Sign Odell Beckham to a contract. Decide you don't want Odell Beckham. Trade him. You end up paying, I think it was like $20+ million of that contract because the day that it got signed, you were locked in to X amount of it. And then we'll trade him away, right? And then we'll make some other decisions, etc. So, just mixed bag of bad GMing, all that kind of stuff. And some of it, I think, from a Gettleman standpoint, was just like, hey, man, shut up. Like just your attitude, your bravado, the way that you talk about things was always a mess. And by the way, hog mollies, fixing the offensive line, never happened under Gettleman's watch. So, and it took a couple of years for the Giants to acknowledge that they couldn't get it done through the draft under Joe Shane and then had to go to free agency. He could have done? Just gone to free agency in the first place, fixed the offensive line immediately, and then worried about everything else after the fact. And that's the conversation that I want to have. Maybe we'll meet up like on a Friday night special or something. We'll sit here and just go back over the Joe Shane era, look at the draft classes, who was available. And we don't get to do, the whole crystal ball of, well, this guy was a steal at that pick. We questioned at the time, the draft pick, whatever team. No, I just mean, what did we advocate for then, and how could it look better now? Offensive line would look different if it was Andy and I calling the shots. Wouldn't look different in terms of Saquon Barkley. Different in terms of Xavier McKinney, in terms of them not being here. Would look different in terms of Saquon Barkley because I would have traded him a year prior to the previous deadline. Not because I don't love Saquon Barkley, not because he isn't a talent, not because he's doing reverse hurdles over players for the Eagles now, but because the value to what your team is and to where you're going to go and to what you need to accomplish. I need max value early. I don't need minimum value late or no value in the case of a lot of these moves. Anyway, trade deadline comes and goes. The Giants don't make any moves. Hopkins went to the Chiefs, obviously. I went to the Chiefs from the Titans. These are earlier, pre-deadline trades. So we saw some things happen around the league even before it came in. Akers, he went to the Vikings from the Texans, right? So he assumes that new backup role there. Bills, Amari Cooper. Make that move. That was a Cooper and a 6th for a 3rd. And a 2026 7th. Because Cooper's a good player. Now, wide receiver value. It is interesting. You might be able to press me on the Darius Slayton, depending on what the package would have been. But so all the moves get made, and the New York Giants don't make any of their own. They're going to stand pat. And in the end, we're going to play out this season. They already said Daniel Jones is the starter. Okay. You want to keep evaluating? Keep evaluating. You're a 2-7 football team. I've already gone over this on the podcast. What I would have done differently in the QB room this offseason to give myself a better opportunity to have not competition, just a better picks, better players to look at, if things went belly up. You're going to put Drew Lock in, go nuts. Some people, and then it's very small, but they say, you should be looking at, got to give Tommy DeVito, give him a long look. He's only like a year and a half younger than Daniel Jones. We can stop with that. I advocated for Desmond Ridder. Put him in the room. Who cares? 3rd round pick. Season's going belly up. Throw him in the mix. Maybe you're not high enough to get the quarterback that you want in next year's draft class, right? So I'm not, and by the way, all this to say, I'm not sitting here saying, oh my God, I can't believe they didn't do anything. We'll rehash this on tomorrow morning on the podcast with Andy. That's not what I'm saying. It's more just, I don't know if the plan you had 3 years ago when you came in, 3 off seasons ago, remained the same through year 1, and then the playoff win, and then the decision for Jones, and then the draft, right? And then the off season, the losing seasons, the 2-7 record now. I just don't know if it's not an organization that sometimes gets caught a bit in the breeze and has a hard time making those difficult decisions. So we'll see. We'll see. As we close in on the hour mark here, we let you know, of course, as I say, tomorrow we're going to talk about who are we evaluating going forward over the final 8 games of the season. Take a look at where the line stands midweek against the Carolina Panthers in Germany. Bye week after that. So we're going to set the table for Azeez Ojulari will be in that mix. Darius Slayton, I think proof has already been in the pudding for him. Dollars and cents in the offseason if you want to retain him. But who are the other players that we want to key in on, focus on here as this season goes along? We're basically at the midway point. So what comes next? How many young players will we check the box on? How many players that we listed in those draft classes going back to 2022? How many are we going to turn around and say, okay, first half of the year, not great, but you're trending back up, Deonte Banks. Okay. Don't know why you couldn't figure it out, but you started getting on the field, Jalen Hyatt. What did you show us? That matters. Evan Neal, you're still on this team for reasons we can't figure out. Get him on the field. Andy advocated for, let's find out what you got with him. I don't think it matters. I already think the science is solved on him. But in a 2-7 season, going down the stretch, put anybody out there you want. Show me something. And we'll see what we come away with. That'll all be coming up tomorrow on the podcast. In the meantime, though, guys, appreciate you over on YouTube. We're going live here. Not going to chop this one up and put it on the podcast feed. Frankly, I was all over the place, hitting on what they did here, there, everywhere, and anything in between. But tomorrow, we'll just tighten it up. Azeez Ojulari, Darius Slayton, final thoughts on the deadline, what to watch going forward, and getting our first look at the Carolina Panthers and what that game means in terms of draft stock. But the podcast feed is a big one for us. This live was brought to you by Personam. It's an AI threat detection system that looks into your network security and helps protect it in ways that other platforms just can't do. You can go over to Personam.com right now, Personam. We're going to have sponsors tomorrow on that show too. But going to the podcast feed and subscribing there, it really means a lot, man. Go click that subscribe button. Leave a review if you can, if you're on one of the platforms that allows you to. Really, really means the world if you go and subscribe to the podcast feed. Cannot stress that enough. So if you're enjoying it, if you're enjoying the shout outs, we want that to be a part of it. We're going to do a lot more. What would you do, to quote Mark Summers, over the course of the back half of this season? What do you want the Giants to do in the offseason? Who do you want to see getting reps week over week? What do you think about the deadline? What do you think about some of the draft picks? We want to hear from the fan base. We want to get you guys in here and have your voice be heard. So get us over on that podcast feed if you can. Until the next time, though, until the best times. As Andrew Mackowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know. As always, let's go Big Blue.